The first time my husband laughed at my work in front of my family, the room went quiet in a way I'll never forget. Not shocked quiet, not angry quiet, the kind of quiet where everyone silently agrees with him. Before I go any further, let me say this. If this story connects with you at any point, take a second to like and subscribe. Not out of politeness, only if you recognize the feeling of being dismissed by the people who should have defended you. Leave a comment too. Tell me where you're listening from. Now let me rewind, because this didn't start with that laugh. It started years earlier, in small moments I told myself didn't matter. My name is Evelyn Hart. I was 32 years old when everything finally broke. I'm a novelist, or at least that's what I had quietly been becoming for a long time, even while everyone around me pretended it was a phase. I wrote literary fiction, the kind that doesn't explode on social media, but earns steady advances, loyal readers, and reviews that use words like restrained and precise. My husband, Marcus Reed, called it a hobby. Marcus was a real businessman. That's how he liked to say it. He ran a regional logistics company based in New Jersey, inherited from his father, and expanded aggressively. Numbers, contracts, warehouses, things he could point to, things my parents understood. We met when I was 26, married when I was 29. At the time, I believed love was compromise. I didn't yet understand how often compromise becomes erasure. My parents, Daniel Hart and Susan Hart, adored Marcus from the start. Daniel liked his decisiveness. Susan liked his confidence. My younger brother, Andrew Hart, liked that Marcus picked up restaurant tabs without blinking. I was the quiet one, the writer, the one who worked from home, who didn't wear suits, who didn't talk about quarterly growth. At family gatherings, people asked Marcus how business was doing. They asked me if I was still writing. Still. As if writing were a cough that hadn't gone away yet. I told myself it was fine. I had my routines. I woke up at 5:30 every morning, wrote for 3 hours, then edited in the afternoon. By 32, I had published 2 novels with a mid-sized New York imprint. My last advance was $75,000. Not flashy, but solid. Marcus never mentioned that number. He liked to say things like, "It's good you enjoy it," or, "At least it keeps you busy." The event that triggered everything was Thanksgiving. My parents hosted that year in their house in Westchester County. Big dining room, long table, too much food. The same family script as always. Marcus arrived late, loud, carrying 2 bottles of expensive wine. Everyone noticed. I had arrived early, helped Susan set the table, listened to her complain about Andrew's girlfriend being unreliable. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Politics avoided, wine poured generously. Halfway through the meal, Daniel asked Marcus about a potential expansion into Pennsylvania. Marcus launched into it with enthusiasm. Numbers, growth projections, logistics. Everyone leaned in. Then Susan turned to me. "And you, Evelyn?" she said. "How's the book thing going?" The book thing. I took a breath. I just signed a contract for my 3rd novel. It comes out next fall. That should have been enough. Marcus laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Not loud. Just amused. Everyone looked at him. "It's cute," he said, smiling. "But let's be honest, it's not exactly a career." I felt the shift before I felt the pain. Susan chuckled lightly. Daniel cleared his throat, but said nothing. Andrew smirked into his glass. I waited. For someone to object, to say that wasn't fair, to remind him I paid half the mortgage, that my books sold. No one did. Marcus continued, warming to his audience. "I mean, if we're talking about real contributions, this family runs on actual businesses. Warehouses don't care about metaphors." That's when I realized I was alone. I said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I kept eating like the moment hadn't just redefined my place at the table. Later that night, as we drove home, I asked him why he'd said that. Marcus shrugged. "I was just joking." I didn't laugh. He glanced at me, irritated. "You're too sensitive about this writing thing. You know my family values practicality." "My family," I said. "Same difference," he replied. That sentence stayed with me. 2 weeks later, something small happened. I received an email from my agent, Laura Klein, while Marcus was on a business call. The subject line read, Offer. I opened it quietly. A streaming platform had optioned my second novel for adaptation. 6 figures. With bonuses. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling something like gravity shift. When Marcus finished his call, I told him. He blinked. Optioned. Like maybe someday? No, I said. Signed. The paperwork is attached. He scanned it quickly, then handed the laptop back. That's nice, he said. But don't get ahead of yourself. Those things fall through all the time. He never told my parents. Christmas was coming, and without knowing it yet, I was walking straight toward the moment when everyone would find out exactly how wrong they'd been about me. The question was whether I would let them rewrite it, or whether I would finally stop being quiet. That answer came sooner than I expected. Christmas that year was supposed to be simple. That was the word my mother used when she called to announce the plans. Simple. Just family. No extended relatives. No big fuss. It should have been my first warning. By early December, the option deal had already moved past celebration and into logistics. Meetings with attorneys, calls with producers, a confidentiality clause thick enough to choke on. I was learning a new language fast, when Marcus showed no interest in understanding. When I told him I needed to fly to Los Angeles for a week of meetings, he frowned. Right before Christmas? He asked. It's part of the contract. He shook his head. This is what I mean, Evelyn. You're letting this writing thing interfere with real life. I didn't argue. I booked the flight. I went. Los Angeles was bright and transactional. Conference rooms with glass walls. People who asked sharp questions and listened closely to the answers. For the first time in a long time, no one asked me if I was still writing. They asked what I wanted. When I came home, Marcus barely asked how it went. He was busy. Always busy lately. Calls behind closed doors, late nights. I told myself it was end-of-year pressure. Businesses had cycles. So did marriages, I thought. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. My parents' house was already lit up when we pulled into the driveway. Marcus took the good coat from the trunk. I carried the gifts. Inside, Susan hugged Marcus first. Daniel shook his hand like a colleague. Andrew clapped him on the shoulder. I waited my turn. Dinner was catered. Susan didn't cook anymore. She said it stressed her out. We sat around the tree afterward, drinks in hand. Presents piled high. Marcus had placed himself at the center of the room without anyone asking him to. Daniel raised his glass. Before we open gifts, he said, I want to make a small announcement. Everyone leaned in. Marcus glanced at me briefly. I assumed he knew. Daniel smiled broadly. Marcus has officially acquired the Patterson Warehouse Group. This puts Reed Logistics on the map in a big way. Applause broke out. Susan wiped her eyes. Andrew whistled. Marcus basked in it. That's when Daniel turned to me. And Evelyn, he said, smiling thinly. You must be proud of your husband. I felt something cold move through me. Yes, I said. I am. Marcus lifted his glass. Thank you, everyone. The gifts started. Marcus received an expensive watch. Andrew got a new laptop. Susan squealed over a designer bag. When it was my turn, Susan handed me a small envelope. It's something symbolic, she said. Inside was a leather-bound notebook. So you can keep writing down your ideas, she said brightly. You never know when one might turn into something real. I smiled. Thank you, Marcus chuckled. See? Supportive. I closed the notebook carefully and set it aside. Halfway through dessert, Andrew asked Marcus about the warehouse deal. Marcus launched into details again. Numbers, strategy. His voice filled the room. Then Andrew turned to me. So, Ev, he said casually, still working on that book? Marcus answered for me. She's dabbling, he said, but nothing to announce. I looked at him. Nothing? He shrugged. I didn't think it was worth mentioning yet. Susan nodded. Best not to get hopes up. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet, unmistakable realization that my life was being narrated by someone else. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, locked the door, stared at my reflection. I didn't look broken. I looked calm. Too calm. When I came back, my phone buzzed. Laura Klein. I stepped into the hallway to answer. They want to move fast, she said without preamble. The platform wants a public announcement in January. Press, interviews, the whole thing. I leaned against the wall. Okay, Evelyn, she added. This is big. Bigger than the option itself. They're positioning you. Positioning me for what? She paused. For authority. I thanked her and hung up. When I re-entered the living room, Marcus was opening another bottle of wine. I caught his eye. I have something to say, I said. The room quieted. I kept my voice steady. The adaptation deal is finalized, I said. The platform plans to announce next month. The contract includes executive consulting credit. Susan blinked. Executive what? Marcus frowned. That's not what you said before. I said it was signed. Daniel cleared his throat. What kind of money are we talking about? 6 figures up front, I said, with back-end participation. Silence. Andrew's eyebrows shot up. Marcus laughed, but this time it was forced. That's not guaranteed income, he said quickly. Those things are risky. I met his eyes. So is expansion, Marcus. Susan looked between us, uneasy. Well, she said, that's nice, but let's not make this dinner about business. Marcus nodded eagerly. Exactly. I didn't push further. But something had shifted. On the drive home, Marcus was quiet. When we got inside, he finally spoke. You embarrassed me, he said. I set my coat down. I told the truth. You blindsided me. You dismissed me for years. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. You're overreacting. I shook my head. I'm finally reacting, he scoffed. Don't let a maybe deal go to your head. I went upstairs without answering. That night, I lay awake and listened to him breathing beside me. For the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped shrinking. The answer was already forming, and it wasn't gentle. The morning after Christmas, Marcus acted like nothing had happened. He woke early, showered, dressed for a meeting, and kissed my cheek the way you do when you're checking something off a list. He didn't mention the argument. He didn't mention my announcement. He didn't mention the way the room had gone quiet. That was his pattern. Ignore until it disappeared. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, rereading notes from Los Angeles. The producer, Nathan Cole, had been specific. He wanted me involved in the adaptation beyond ceremonial credit. Script consultation, character development, a seat in the room. Authority, Laura had said. When Marcus left, he paused at the door. Don't forget, he said, we're having dinner with my parents on Friday. They want to talk about the warehouse expansion. I looked up. I thought Christmas was enough family for a while. He frowned. Don't start. I wasn't starting. I was noticing. Friday came quickly. Too quickly. Marcus's parents, Leonard Reed and Patricia Reed, lived in a large house in Short Hills. Old money energy without the actual money. Everything curated to suggest permanence. Patricia greeted Marcus warmly, then turned to me. Evelyn, she said. You look rested. I nodded. Dinner was formal, assigned seating, heavy silverware. Leonard sat at the head of the table. Marcus walked them through the acquisition again, this time with slides pulled up on his phone. Patricia nodded approvingly. Leonard asked questions that weren't really questions, more like prompts. Then Patricia turned to me. Marcus tells us you've been busy with your writing again. Again. I smiled politely. Yes, Marcus cut in. It's a short-term thing. She's excited. Leonard smiled thinly. Excitement fades. Infrastructure lasts. I took a sip of water. Patricia tilted her head. Have you considered something more stable? Teaching, perhaps? Universities like having authors on staff. I looked at Marcus. He shrugged. We've talked about it. We hadn't. Leonard cleared his throat. Marriage requires balance. One person can't indulge fantasies, while the other carries the weight. There it was. I set my glass down carefully. My writing pays for itself, I said, and contributes. Leonard raised an eyebrow. Contributes how much? Marcus answered. Not consistently. I turned to him. Why are you answering for me? He stiffened. I'm just being realistic. Realistic for whom? Patricia smiled nervously. Let's not argue. I leaned back. You're right, I said calmly. Let's not. Dinner continued, but the tone had shifted. The food tasted like cardboard. On the drive home, Marcus was furious. You undermined me, he said. By speaking? By contradicting me in front of my parents. I stared out the window. You contradicted me first. He gripped the steering wheel. You don't understand how this works. I looked at him. Explain it to me. He hesitated, then said it. My family values stability. They expect me to lead. They don't respect uncertainty. And I represent uncertainty. He didn't deny it. When we got home, he went straight to his office and closed the door. I sat alone in the living room and thought about Laura's word again. Authority. The next week, the first press inquiry came in. A trade publication. Small, but legitimate. Laura forwarded it with a note. "This is starting," I replied. "I'm ready." Marcus didn't know. Or maybe he didn't want to know. He'd started coming home later, taking calls outside, locking his phone. One night, I asked him directly, "Are you avoiding me?" He sighed dramatically. "I'm busy. Busy enough not to talk to your wife. You're making everything about you." I watched him carefully. That sentence landed differently than it used to, because I realized something then. He wasn't dismissing my work because it was trivial. He was dismissing it because it threatened the hierarchy he relied on. The next family event was my mother's birthday in January. Susan insisted we all be there. Dinner at a restaurant in Manhattan. Private room. Marcus arrived late, again. Everyone noticed. Susan hugged him tightly. Daniel shook his hand. Andrew clapped him on the back. I slid into my seat. Wine poured, toasts given. Then Susan said it. "Before dessert, I just want to say how proud we are of Marcus this year." She smiled at him. I waited. She turned to me. "And Evelyn," she said, "we're so glad you've been supportive." Supportive. That was my role. Marcus raised his glass. Couldn't do it without her. I smiled thinly. I stood. "Actually," I said, "I'd like to say something too." Marcus shot me a look. I ignored it. "Last week, I signed the final agreement with the platform adapting my novel. Production begins in March. I'll be consulting full-time through the first season." Silence. Andrew blinked. "Full-time?" "Yes." Daniel frowned. "Does that interfere with your household responsibilities?" Marcus opened his mouth. I continued. "It also means we'll be spending time in Vancouver during production." Susan's face tightened. Marcus finally spoke. "We haven't discussed that." I met his eyes. "You didn't ask." The room buzzed with discomfort. Susan laughed nervously. "Well, that's exciting, I suppose." Daniel leaned back. "Temporary, though, right?" I paused. "No." Marcus stood abruptly. "Excuse me," he said. He left the room. I stayed seated. Andrew shifted uncomfortably. Susan patted my hand. "You know how he is. Under a lot of pressure." I withdrew my hand. "So am I." Marcus didn't come back. When we got home, the argument exploded. "You blindsided me again," he shouted. "You've been erasing me for years," I said evenly. "That's not fair. What's fair about pretending my work doesn't exist?" He stared at me, breathing hard. "This marriage works because I provide stability." I nodded. "And what happens when I stop accepting instability disguised as control?" He laughed bitterly. "You wouldn't dare." That was the moment. Not the shouting, not the insults, that sentence. I went upstairs and locked the bedroom door. I didn't sleep. In the early hours of the morning, I opened my laptop and began outlining something new. Not a novel, a plan, because I finally understood the truth. Marcus didn't underestimate me. He was afraid of me. And fear makes people careless. I just had to wait long enough to see where. The next morning, Marcus acted like the argument hadn't happened. Again. He left early, sent a brief text about a late meeting, and didn't mention Vancouver, the announcement, or the way he'd laughed when he thought I wouldn't dare. That word stayed with me. Dare. As if my life were something that required his permission. I didn't confront him. Not because I was afraid, but because something in me had gone still. When anger fades too quickly, it's usually being replaced by clarity. 2 days later, my mother, Susan Hart, called. She didn't ask how I was. She never did after difficult moments. She preferred to smooth surfaces, not inspect cracks. "Your father and I are worried," she said. "About what?" "About Marcus," she replied. "He seemed very upset at my birthday dinner." I waited. "You shouldn't put him in that position, Evelyn. Men don't like surprises that make them look unprepared." I looked out the window at the gray January sky over Brooklyn. "What about me?" I asked. "Do you worry about me?" There was a pause, just long enough to register. "You're strong," Susan said. "You always have been." That was her favorite way to excuse neglect. Strength as abandonment. "We just don't want you jeopardizing your marriage over ambitions." I smiled faintly. They couldn't see me, but it didn't matter. "I'm not jeopardizing my marriage, Mom. I'm living my life," she sighed. You sound defensive. I ended the call. That afternoon, I met my agent, Laura Klein, at her office near Union Square. Laura had known me since my first manuscript. She'd seen me doubt myself in quieter ways, but she'd never seen me distracted. "Something's changed," she said after I sat down. "Yes." She studied me. "Good or bad?" "Necessary." I told her about Marcus, about my family, about the pattern. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she leaned back. "You know this is about more than your marriage, right?" I nodded. "It's about authorship, of your work and your narrative." I smiled at that. "Nathan wants you in the room for everything," she continued. "Scripts, casting, even press strategy. That's not normal, Evelyn. They see you as an asset, not an accessory." Accessory. The word stung, because it was accurate. I asked her a question I'd been circling for weeks. If I needed legal advice about protecting my work and my income, who would you recommend? Laura didn't hesitate. "Mark Feldman, Entertainment and Family Law. He doesn't miss details." I met Mark Feldman 2 days later. His office was smaller than I expected. Minimal. No show. He listened quietly as I explained my situation. The marriage, the income disparity, the contracts, the looming move to Vancouver. He asked precise questions. Dates, amounts, clauses. When I finished, he folded his hands. "You're not asking about divorce," he said. "Not yet." "No." "You're asking about leverage." "Yes." He nodded. "Then here's the important part. Your income is separate property. Your intellectual property is separate. The option deal, the back-end participation, the consulting fees, all yours. Marcus has no claim? Not unless you've commingled funds improperly. Have you? No. Then you're protected." I felt something loosen in my chest. "However," Mark continued, "marriage isn't just emotional. It's strategic. And from what you're describing, your husband benefits from keeping you small." I didn't argue. He slid a folder toward me. "These are the documents you should have. Just in case." Just in case. That phrase followed me home. That night, Marcus came home unusually early. He poured himself a drink and leaned against the counter. "We need to talk," he said. I nodded. "Okay." He exhaled. "This Vancouver thing. It's not practical." I waited. "My business can't just pause," he continued. "And your parents are already concerned." "My parents." I met his eyes. "Concerned about what?" "About you changing." I smiled slightly. "That's interesting." "What is?" "That no one was concerned when I was shrinking." His jaw tightened. "This marriage works because we have roles." There it was. The word he'd been avoiding. Roles. "And yours is what?" I asked. He hesitated. "Supporting mine." I nodded slowly. "Then this marriage doesn't work." He stared at me. "You don't mean that." I did. He laughed, short and sharp. "Don't be dramatic." I walked past him and into the bedroom, closed the door. Not locked, closed. For the first time, I noticed he didn't follow. The next escalation came from an unexpected place. My brother, Andrew Hart, called me the following Sunday. We rarely spoke one-on-one. He preferred group dynamics. Less accountability. "Hey, Ev," he said. "Listen, Dad mentioned you might be moving." "I might." "That's sudden." "Not really." He hesitated. "Look, Marcus is under a lot of pressure. He's worried you're pulling away." I smiled to myself. Andrew lowered his voice. "Dad says maybe you should slow things down. Focus on family. The writing can wait." I closed my eyes. "Andrew," I said, "how much do you think Marcus makes in a year?" He blinked. "I don't know. A lot." "Do you know how much I made last year?" He was silent. "I made $140,000 from my writing, not including this new deal." His breath caught. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because no one asked." The line went quiet. Andrew finally spoke. "I didn't know. That's the problem." I hung up, feeling strangely calm. The press announcement went live 2 weeks later. Trade articles, interviews. My name, my photo, my words. Marcus saw it online before I mentioned it. He stormed into the living room, phone in hand. "Why didn't you tell me this was happening?" I looked up from my laptop. "You told me not to get ahead of myself." His face flushed. "Do you know what people are saying?" I nodded. "Yes." "That I married above my station?" I smiled faintly. "No, that you underestimated your wife." He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "This isn't over," he said. I agreed. No, it wasn't. Because the more visible I became, the harder it would be for everyone else to keep pretending I didn't matter. And someone, eventually, was going to make a mistake trying to stop that. I was just waiting to see who. The mistake came sooner than I expected. It arrived in the form of an email Marcus didn't realize I could see. We shared a home office system for years. A convenience, he'd said. Everything synced. Calendars, printers, cloud storage. I'd suggested separating accounts once, after he accidentally deleted a draft of my first novel. He'd waved it off. Trust, Evelyn. We're married. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon in late January, I was revising notes from a script meeting when a notification popped up on the shared desktop. Subject: Asset Alignment Before Vancouver. From Patricia Reed, his mother. I didn't open it right away. I stared at the subject line, felt that familiar tightening behind my ribs. Not fear, recognition. Then I clicked. Patricia's tone was polite, controlled, the way women like her write when they're about to suggest something cruel and call it practical. Marcus, your father and I are concerned about the trajectory of Evelyn's career and how it may affect your long-term stability. With her income fluctuating and public attention increasing, it may be wise to review how assets are structured before any international move. We recommend speaking with Jonathan Pierce. He helped Leonard protect the family business years ago. Protect, I scrolled. This is not about control, Patricia continued. It's about ensuring that what you've built remains secure, regardless of distractions. Distractions. I closed the email and sat back in my chair. They weren't just dismissing my work. They were planning around it. That evening, Marcus came home in a better mood than he'd been in weeks. He cooked dinner, opened a good bottle of wine, asked about my day. I answered, politely, neutrally. Halfway through the meal, he said it. My parents think we should talk to a financial advisor, just to plan ahead. I looked at him. Plan ahead? For what? Everything, he said quickly. Vancouver, taxes, assets. I nodded. Okay. Relief flickered across his face. He hadn't expected agreement. Jonathan Pierce came highly recommended, Marcus said. He specializes in protecting business owners. Protecting them from what? I asked. He smiled. Uncertainty. We scheduled the meeting for Friday. I called Mark Feldman immediately after Marcus went to bed. He listened quietly as I read Patricia's email aloud. They're trying to restructure before your income becomes undeniable, he said. This is preemptive. Is it legal? Some of it, yes. Some of it, no. Depends on what Marcus discloses and how transparent he intends to be. What should I do? Mark paused. Let them talk. That surprised me. You don't stop someone from revealing their intentions, he continued. You document them. Friday came. Jonathan Pierce was exactly what I expected. Polished, confident, carefully vague. He spoke mostly to Marcus. Business owners often need insulation, Jonathan said, especially when spouses have volatile income streams. Volatile. I smiled politely. My income has increased year over year for 5 years, I said. Would you like the numbers? Jonathan blinked. Marcus cut in. What Jonathan means is, it's not guaranteed. Neither is logistics expansion, I replied. Marcus shot me a warning look. Jonathan cleared his throat. We could consider restructuring certain accounts, placing assets in trusts, limiting exposure. Exposure to whom? I asked. Jonathan hesitated. Risk. I nodded. Of course. Mark Feldman's voice echoed in my head. Document. That night, Marcus was tense. You didn't have to challenge him, he said. I didn't challenge him. I asked questions. You made it seem like I was hiding something. I watched him carefully. Are you? He didn't answer. The next week, my parents invited us to dinner. Marcus insisted we go. Susan hugged me tightly. Too tightly. Daniel asked Marcus about Vancouver, about timelines, about whether I'd still be able to manage a household from another country. I answered calmly. We'll manage. Susan smiled thinly. Of course. Then Daniel said it. Evelyn, we were thinking. With all this change, maybe it would be wise for Marcus to handle major financial decisions for now, just until things settle. I set my fork down. Why? Because stability matters, Daniel said. Someone has to be grounded. Marcus nodded. I looked at both of them. I am grounded. Susan reached for my hand. Sweetheart, this isn't personal. I withdrew my hand. It never is. Marcus cleared his throat. We've talked about this, Ev. We haven't. Yes, we have. You're just being emotional. That word again. Emotional. I stood. I'm going to step outside. I walked into the cold night air and stood on the sidewalk, breathing slowly. Behind me, through the window, I could see them. Marcus leaning in, Susan nodding, Daniel speaking. Decisions being made without me. Again, my phone buzzed. Laura Klein. They want you on a panel, she said. Major Literary Festival, March, New York. I smiled into the cold. I'll do it. When I went back inside, dinner had moved on. Marcus looked up. We were just saying, he began. I raised my hand. We're not having this conversation here. Susan frowned. Don't be difficult. I met her eyes. I'm done being cooperative at my own expense. The drive home was silent. At home, Marcus finally snapped. You're sabotaging everything. I looked at him. Everything for whom? For us. I shook my head. For you. He stared at me, breathing hard. If you keep pushing, you're going to force choices you don't want. I nodded. That's the point. He laughed, harsh and incredulous. You think you have leverage? I walked past him, picked up my laptop, and headed to the bedroom. I did have leverage. He just didn't know yet how much of it was already in writing. And the moment he tried to move money without me knowing, he would cross a line he couldn't uncross. I opened a new folder on my laptop. I named it January. Inside, I saved emails, notes, dates, names. I wasn't writing fiction anymore. I was recording reality. And reality, unlike Marcus, didn't care who felt threatened by the truth. March arrived with no warning and no mercy. The literary festival took over Midtown Manhattan for 4 days, turning quiet rooms into crowded panels and private conversations into public currency. My name was printed on banners, not large, but visible. Large enough that people stopped me in hallways and said they'd read my work. Large enough that I was no longer invisible. Marcus came with me on the first day. That alone should have told me something was wrong. He wore his best suit, the one he reserved for investors, not family. He smiled too much. He introduced himself before I could. My husband, he kept saying, as if the title still guaranteed ownership. At the panel, I spoke about process, about discipline, about refusing to write to be palatable. The room was full. Cameras recorded. Questions came fast. When it ended, applause followed me into the aisle. Marcus leaned in and whispered, "Don't let this go to your head." I smiled for the cameras. That evening, the festival hosted a private dinner for speakers and industry guests. A long table, name cards, carefully curated seating. My card placed me between 2 editors. Marcus's card wasn't there. He frowned. There must be a mistake. The coordinator apologized. Spouses weren't included in this one. Marcus laughed. I'm not just a spouse. She smiled politely. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't intervene. He waited for me to say something. I didn't. Throughout dinner, I felt his absence like a pressure at my back. Not guilt. Awareness. This was the first room where my presence didn't require his. When I got back to the hotel, he was furious. You let them disrespect me. They followed their policy. You could have spoken up. I looked at him. Why? He stared at me like the question itself was treason. Because you're my wife. I nodded. And you're not my gatekeeper. That night, he slept on the couch. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Reed. We need to talk. Urgently. I didn't respond. At the festival's closing event, something shifted again. Nathan Cole, the producer, introduced me to a group of executives. One of them mentioned Vancouver. Another mentioned a writer's room schedule. Someone asked if I'd be relocating temporarily. I answered calmly. Marcus stood nearby, listening. Later, in the elevator, he exploded. You're making plans without me. I looked at the numbers glowing above the door. I'm making plans for my work. Your work affects our marriage. So does your control. He laughed sharply. You think you're untouchable now because some people clapped? I met his eyes. Number 1. I think I'm finally visible. The next week, the real humiliation came. Not at a dinner. Not at a panel. At my parents' house. Susan had invited us for a Sunday lunch. Casual, she said. No pressure. Marcus insisted we go. Halfway through the meal, Daniel cleared his throat. We've been discussing some concerns, he said, looking at Marcus. My stomach tightened. Daniel turned to me. Evelyn, we think it might be wise to keep family finances separate from Experimental income streams. Experimental. I waited. Marcus leaned forward. We've talked about setting boundaries. For stability. Susan nodded. It's only temporary. Andrew added. You don't want to overextend yourself. I looked around the table. So this is an intervention. Marcus bristled. It's not like that. I stood. It's exactly like that. Susan's face fell. Sit down, Evelyn. No. Daniel frowned. Don't be dramatic. I felt the familiar phrase try to land and slide off me. You're discussing my income like it's imaginary, I said evenly. You're planning around my life without asking me. And you're doing it in a room where you assume I'll stay quiet. Marcus stood too. We're trying to protect you. From what? I asked. Success? Susan's voice shook. You're changing. I nodded. Yes. Marcus reached for my arm. I stepped back. Don't. The room went silent. I picked up my coat. We'll talk about this at home, Marcus said tightly. No, I said. We won't. I walked out alone. That night, he didn't come home. The next day, I received an email from Jonathan Pierce. Subject: follow-up documentation. He'd attached a draft outlining asset reallocation, trusts, accounts, provisions that limited spousal access. My access. I forwarded it to Mark Feldman. He called within minutes. They moved without consent, he said. That's significant. How significant? Enough. That evening, Marcus came home late, smelling like alcohol and anger. We need to talk, he said. I nodded. Sit. He paced instead. You're blowing this out of proportion. You tried to restructure our finances without me, he scoffed. It was precautionary. I opened my laptop and turned it toward him. Jonathan's email glowed between us. He froze. You went behind my back. You went behind mine first. He ran a hand through his hair. My parents are worried. Your parents are irrelevant. His eyes flashed. Don't say that. I stood. This marriage is not a boardroom, and I am not a liability to be managed. He stared at me. If you keep this up, he said slowly, you're going to end up alone. I tilted my head. You've already been treating me like I am. He said nothing. I walked past him, into the bedroom, and locked the door. Not to keep him out, to keep myself in. I sat on the bed and felt something settle. Not sadness, not rage, resolve. Because the truth was clear now. Marcus wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing control over the story, where he was the provider and I was the accessory. And he'd just given me proof that he was willing to cross legal lines to preserve that fiction. The next move would be mine, and it wouldn't be private. It would be precise. Because when people try to erase you quietly, the most effective response isn't noise, it's documentation. And I had more than enough. I didn't confront Marcus right away after Jonathan's email. That was deliberate. People assume confrontation is strength. It isn't. Timing is. The week after the festival, I moved through my days carefully, like someone walking across a frozen lake. Normal routines, neutral tone, no accusations. I cooked. I answered emails. I packed for Vancouver. Slowly, methodically. Even though Marcus pretended the trip wasn't happening, he noticed the suitcases eventually. You're really going through with this, he said one night, standing in the doorway of the bedroom. Yes. For how long? 3 months, possibly longer. He laughed without humor. You can't just leave. I zipped the suitcase. I can. I am. He didn't argue. That should have worried me more than it did. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:12 a.m. Unknown number, I answered. Miss Hart, this is Claire Donovan. The voice was calm, professional. I'm a senior editor at Ridgeway Press. We're reviewing a manuscript submission, and I wanted to confirm something before proceeding. I sat up straighter. Which manuscript? The one titled Saltwater Rooms, submitted under the name E. Hart. My stomach dropped. That was my first novel. The one I wrote before Marcus. The one I never published because he'd said it was indulgent. The one I'd locked away on an external drive years ago. Yes, I said carefully. That's mine. There was a pause. We received it last week, Claire said. Through an agent, Marcus Reed. The room went quiet around me. He claimed co-authorship, she continued. Or rather, that the work was produced during the marriage, and therefore subject to shared rights. I closed my eyes. Did he provide documentation? I asked. Some. Emails, notes. He positioned himself as a developmental partner. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Claire hesitated. Before we proceed, I wanted to hear directly from you. Thank you, I said. I'll have my attorney contact you today. When I hung up, my hands were steady. That surprised me. Marcus had crossed from dismissal into theft. I called Mark Feldman. He didn't sound surprised. This is what happens when control slips, he said. People try to reclaim it through ownership. Can he do this? He can try, but it's sloppy. I forwarded him everything. The old drafts, the timestamps, the external drive backups, the emails where Marcus told me not to pursue publication. Mark exhaled. He just handed you leverage, Evelyn. That evening, Marcus came home cheerful. Too cheerful. He poured himself a drink and leaned against the counter. We should talk about saltwater rooms, he said. I looked at him. Why? Because I found a publisher interested, he replied easily. It could be a good opportunity. For us. For us. You submitted my novel without my consent, I said. He shrugged. It was written during the marriage. It was written before you, I replied. He smiled thinly. That's not how courts see it. I stepped closer. You don't get to claim my voice because you're losing your grip. His expression hardened. You think this industry cares about you without me? I met his eyes. Yes. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I didn't spiral. I organized. I created a timeline. Dates, drafts, contracts, communications. I titled the document, Authorship. The next day, Mark filed a cease and desist. Ridgeway Press withdrew the submission within hours. Claire Donovan emailed me directly. I'm sorry, she wrote. We won't be proceeding with any material submitted by Mr. Reed. I forwarded the email to Marcus. He didn't respond. 3 days later, my parents called. Susan's voice was tight. Why didn't you tell us you were fighting with Marcus? I took a breath. Because I'm not fighting. I'm responding. Daniel jumped in. He says you're trying to destroy him. I smiled faintly. He tried to claim my work as his own. Susan gasped. That's not what he said. Of course not. Andrew spoke next. Ev, this is getting ugly. It got ugly when he crossed legal lines. Susan's voice wavered. You don't have to ruin your marriage over pride. I paused. This isn't pride. It's authorship. They didn't understand. Not yet, and they weren't going to. The final mistake came a week later. I received a notification from the Writers Guild. A copyright registration had been filed for Saltwater Rooms. Filed by Marcus Reed. My name listed second. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was over. I forwarded everything to Mark. He called immediately. This is fraud, he said. Clean and documented. What happens now? Now we stopped playing defense. That afternoon, I boarded a flight to Vancouver. Marcus didn't come to the airport. He didn't text. He didn't call. When I landed, I checked into a small apartment arranged by production. Clean, quiet, mine. That night, I sat at the desk by the window and opened my laptop. I began writing again. Not fiction. A sworn statement. Because the next phase wouldn't happen in living rooms or at dinner tables. It would happen in places where documentation mattered more than charm. And when Marcus realized that my silence had never been weakness, only restraint, it would already be too late for him to take anything back. I saved the file. I named it Exhibit A. And for the first time since I'd married him, I slept without dreaming of shrinking. Vancouver stripped things down to essentials. Rain, gray light, long days in rooms where every word mattered. The writer's room met 6 days a week in a converted office overlooking the harbor. Whiteboards filled with arcs and timelines. Coffee, always cold by noon. No one asked about my husband. They asked about the characters. That alone felt like oxygen. Nathan Cole ran the room with quiet authority. He didn't flatter. He didn't hover. When disagreements surfaced, he listened, then chose. Clean, decisive. On my third day, he pulled me aside. We're adjusting the episode order, he said. I want you to lead the table read discussion tomorrow. I nodded. That evening, Mark Feldman called. He didn't waste time. We filed an injunction this afternoon, he said. Copyright fraud, false attribution, interference with contractual relations. I closed the curtains and sat on the edge of the bed. What does that mean? For him, it means he can't touch your work. It also means discovery. Discovery. That word carries weight when you understand it. Emails, documents, financial records, timelines, truth, organized. Marcus called for the first time in weeks that night. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Evelyn," he said, his voice tight and controlled. "We need to resolve this, quietly. You're making a mistake." I deleted it. The next morning, I received an email from my mother. Subject: "Please call." I didn't. At lunch, Laura Klein texted me a screenshot. A business blog had picked up a short piece. No names yet. Just a note about a logistics executive under scrutiny for misrepresentation in intellectual property filings. Marcus's world was small. That ripple would reach him fast. The table read went well. Too well. Afterward, a junior writer approached me. "I didn't know authors could be this present," she said. "I thought you'd just consult and disappear." I smiled. I don't disappear. That afternoon, Mark emailed me a list. Depositions scheduled. Marcus Reed, Jonathan Pierce, Patricia Reed. Patricia. I exhaled slowly. The first deposition was Marcus's. It took place in New Jersey 2 weeks later. I attended remotely. Marcus looked different on screen. Smaller, his confidence replaced by something brittle. The opposing counsel asked clean questions. When did you submit the manuscript? What role did you play in its creation? Why did you list yourself as primary registrant? Marcus stumbled. He contradicted himself twice in the first hour. At one point, he said, "I was protecting our shared interests." Mark leaned forward. "Whose interests, Mr. Reed?" Marcus hesitated. The silence stretched. That silence would be transcribed. Patricia's deposition was worse. She tried to control the room, spoke over questions, reframed, deflected. Then Mark produced her email. Asset alignment before Vancouver. Her mouth tightened. She claimed concern, prudence, maternal instinct. Mark asked one question. Did you advise your son to limit his wife's access to income generated by her own intellectual property? Patricia paused. Yes, she said. I did. The pause mattered. Jonathan Pierce's deposition ended the charade. He admitted Marcus had asked about reclassifying assets to minimize exposure in the event of separation. Separation. I watched from Vancouver as the story assembled itself. Not as revenge, as consequence. Marcus texted me late one night. "We can still fix this." I replied once. No. The next escalation came from my parents. They flew to Vancouver, unannounced. Susan called from the lobby. "We need to see you," she said, "in person." I met them in a cafe near the production office. Public. Neutral. Susan looked worn. Daniel looked angry. "Why didn't you tell us it had gotten this bad?" Susan asked. I stirred my coffee. "Because when I told you small things, you minimized them." Daniel leaned forward. "Marcus is facing serious damage." I nodded. "He caused it." Daniel's voice hardened. "Marriage isn't a courtroom." "No," I said, "but fraud is." Susan reached for my hand. "We raised you to be forgiving. You raised me to be quiet." She flinched. Daniel spoke carefully. "If you continue, this will end your marriage." I met his eyes. "It already has." Susan's breath caught. "What?" "I filed last week," I said. "Separation, effective immediately." The words landed heavily. Daniel looked stunned. Susan looked betrayed. "You didn't tell us." "I didn't need permission." Susan shook her head. "You're destroying your life." I smiled faintly. "Number. I'm reclaiming it." They left shortly after. Marcus didn't show up at the next deposition. His attorney cited health reasons. The judge rescheduled and warned sanctions. The blog ran another piece. This one named Logistics CEO accused of copyright fraud in spousal dispute. The word spouse appeared exactly once. My name appeared 3 times, not as his wife, as the author. That distinction mattered. Production wrapped the first block early. Nathan handed me a revised contract. "We want you on for the full season," he said. "Executive consulting credit stays. We're also adding a producer title." I read it carefully. Then I signed. That night, I walked along the seawall alone. The city reflected in dark water, lights steady, unconcerned. I thought about the notebook my mother gave me, the leather-bound one meant to hold ideas. I realized something then. They'd never believed my work was real until it threatened their structure. And when it did, they tried to own it. Marcus hadn't loved my writing. He'd loved that he could dismiss it. When that stopped, He panicked. My phone buzzed. A message from Andrew. Ev, Dad says you're going too far, I replied. Tell him I stopped exactly where the law begins. The next morning, Mark called. We have a hearing date, he said. Public record. When? 3 weeks. I looked out at the water. Good. Because when people try to erase you quietly, the truth has a way of demanding a stage. And this time, I wasn't going to shrink to fit it. I was going to stand exactly where I belonged, in my own name, with my work intact and nothing left to take from me. The hearing date landed like a stone dropped into still water. March 28th, Superior Court of New Jersey, public docket. Mark Feldman didn't dramatize it when he told me. He didn't need to. Public meant witnesses, records, reporters who knew how to read between filings. It meant Marcus couldn't hide behind family dinners or closed doors anymore. It also meant my family would have to choose where to sit. The week before the hearing, my parents tried one last time. Susan called first. Her voice was soft, careful, like she was approaching a wild animal. Evelyn, please, just come home for a few days. Let's talk this through as a family. I was in Vancouver, sitting in a production office with drafts spread across the table. There's nothing left to talk through, Mom. Daniel took the phone from her. You're making this public, he said. You're humiliating him. I closed my laptop. Number. He did that when he filed fraudulent paperwork. Daniel's voice sharpened. You could still settle. Quietly. Save face. Whose face? There was a pause. Ours. That told me everything. I ended the call without raising my voice. Marcus's attorney reached out 2 days later. Subject: settlement discussion. Mark reviewed it and laughed once, dry and humorless. He wants to walk this back, Mark said. No admission of wrongdoing. Mutual non-disparagement. Confidentiality. And my work? He'll release claims. Quietly. I stared at the city through the window. No. Mark nodded. That's what I thought. The night before the hearing, I flew back to New York. I didn't stay at the house. I booked a hotel near the courthouse. Neutral ground, clean lines, no history. I slept well. In the morning, I wore black. Not dramatic, professional. The same way I dressed for panels, for meetings where words mattered. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered loosely. Not a mob. Curious. Alert. One of them called my name. Ms. Hart, is this about your divorce? I stopped. This is about authorship, I said. And accountability. I walked inside. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled. Controlled. A place designed to reduce chaos. Marcus sat at the defendant's table with his attorney. He looked tired. Not remorseful. Just worn down by resistance he hadn't anticipated. When his eyes met mine, something flickered. Not love. Calculation. My parents sat behind him. Susan clutched her purse like a shield. Daniel stared straight ahead. Andrew wasn't there. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Mark laid out the timeline with surgical precision. Drafts created before marriage. Time-stamped backups. Emails where Marcus discouraged publication. The submission without consent. The copyright filing listing himself first. Then the injunction. Then the discovery. Marcus's attorney objected often. Lost most of them. When Mark introduced Patricia Reed's deposition transcript, Susan stiffened. When Jonathan Pierce's testimony appeared on screen, Marcus's jaw tightened. Then Mark called me. I stood, walked to the witness stand, and sat. I swore in. He asked simple questions. When did you write the manuscript? Who retained the original files? Did you authorize submission or registration? No, no, no. The judge looked at Marcus. Mr. Reed, do you dispute these facts? Marcus's attorney whispered urgently. Marcus hesitated, then said it. I believed I was entitled to protect marital assets. Mark didn't object. He let the sentence sit. The judge leaned forward. Intellectual property authored independently is not a marital asset by default, Mr. Reed, especially not when misrepresented. Marcus swallowed. The ruling came quickly. Injunction upheld. Copyright registration voided. Sanctions imposed. Legal fees awarded. The gavel struck. Susan gasped softly. Marcus closed his eyes. Outside the courtroom, the reporters were more confident now. Ms. Hart, do you feel vindicated? I paused. I feel finished. That quote made it everywhere. Marcus didn't speak to the press. Neither did my parents. By the next morning, the story had moved beyond blogs, business outlets, arts sections. Headlines careful but clear. Logistics executive sanctioned in copyright dispute with author's spouse. Author wins injunction in high-profile authorship case. My name appeared without Marcus's. That mattered. My parents came to the hotel that afternoon. Susan looked smaller. Daniel looked furious. "How could you do this to us?" Susan asked. I poured water into 3 glasses and slid them across the table. "Sit." Daniel didn't. "This didn't have to be public," he said. Neither did his filing. Susan's voice broke. "He's your husband." He was. Daniel's face hardened. "Family doesn't sue family." I looked at him. "Family doesn't steal." Silence filled the room. Susan finally sat. "We didn't raise you like this," she said. "You raised me to endure. I chose something else." Daniel pointed at the window, at the city beyond. "Do you know what people are saying?" I nodded. "They're saying the truth." Susan started to cry. Quietly, controlled. "We wanted peace," she whispered. "Peace without justice is silence," I said. And I did silence already. They left without another word. Marcus texted me once that night. "You got what you wanted," I replied. "I got what was mine." I blocked his number. 2 days later, Nathan called. "The network loved how you handled yourself," he said. "Calm, clear. No spectacle." I smiled. "They're offering a multi-season consulting deal. With escalation." I accepted. The separation agreement finalized the following week. No drama, no surprises. Marcus moved out of the house we once shared. I kept nothing but my work and my name. That was enough. The last message came from Andrew. "I should have stood up for you sooner." I stared at it for a long time, then typed, "Sooner matters less than next time." I put the phone down. Outside, spring had arrived without asking anyone's permission. Trees budding, streets loud again, life continuing. The hearing had ended. The marriage had ended. But something else had finally begun. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. And the last chapter wasn't going to be about what they lost. It was going to be about what I kept. My voice, my work, and the quiet power of knowing I would never let anyone claim them again. The first week after the hearing felt unreal in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not triumphant, not empty, just strangely quiet. I returned to Vancouver and stepped back into the writer's room like nothing monumental had happened. Coffee cups on the table, whiteboards half erased, the rhythm of people who expected me to contribute, not explain. No one asked how court went. Nathan Cole simply nodded when I walked in, slid a revised outline toward me, and said, "We're restructuring episode 4. Thoughts?" That normalcy grounded me more than any congratulation could have. At night, though, the past kept knocking. Not loudly, not dramatically, just small, persistent taps. Emails from people who hadn't spoken to me in years. Old acquaintances who suddenly remembered my name. Distant relatives who framed curiosity as concern. I didn't answer most of them. I was learning that access is not an obligation. Marcus's attorney sent one final message, confirming compliance with the ruling. Dry. Procedural. No apology embedded between the lines. Marcus himself stayed silent. That silence was new and revealing. A week later, my mother, Susan Hart, sent a text that didn't ask anything. "I didn't know how to be a mother to someone like you." I read it twice. Then I put the phone down and went for a long walk along the seawall. The truth was, I didn't know how to be a daughter in a family that only valued me when I was convenient. That mismatch had existed long before Marcus. Long before writing became visible enough to threaten anyone. Marcus had simply been the sharpest expression of a deeper pattern. When I came back to New York at the end of the month, the house was already half empty. Marcus had moved out quickly, efficiently, like someone exiting a losing position. The rooms felt larger without him. Not lonelier, just honest. I found one thing he'd left behind, a framed photo from our second anniversary. The one my mother loved because it made us look balanced. Him centered, me angled toward him, smiling politely. I took it down and slid it into a box marked donate. The divorce proceedings were mercifully brief. No custody battles, no theatrics, just paperwork, signatures, and a judge who didn't care about our history beyond the law. At the final hearing, Marcus didn't look at me. When it was over, he stood quickly and left. That was it. No final confrontation. No dramatic goodbye. I realized then that I didn't need closure from him. The closure came the moment he tried to own something that was never his. My parents tried again after the divorce finalized. Daniel Hart called this time, not Susan. His voice was stiff, controlled. Your mother is having a hard time. I waited. This has divided the family, he said. I closed my eyes briefly. It revealed the family, I replied. He didn't like that. We're not villains, Evelyn. I opened my eyes. I never said you were, but you weren't allies either. Silence. He spoke more quietly. Do you regret it? I thought about that question carefully. No. He exhaled. You always did take things to extremes. I smiled faintly. You only think it's extreme because you benefited from my restraint. That ended the conversation. In Vancouver, production moved into a new phase. Budget meetings, casting confirmations, marketing discussions where my opinion carried weight. One afternoon, Nathan handed me a new contract. This is optional, he said, but we want you credited as co-executive producer next season. I read it slowly. The title I signed. That night, I sat alone in the apartment and opened the old leather notebook my mother had given me for Christmas, the one meant to contain ideas. I tore out the first page, then the second. I didn't need a symbol of permission anymore. I started using it to track decisions instead. Boundaries. Things I would not negotiate again. I do not explain my worth to people invested in misunderstanding it. I do not stay quiet to preserve someone else's comfort. I do not confuse endurance with love. Weeks passed. Andrew Hart texted once, late at night. I keep replaying things, he wrote. I didn't know how bad it was, I replied. Knowing comes after listening. He didn't respond. That was fine. The final echo of Marcus came unexpectedly. An industry friend forwarded me a short article. Marcus Reed had stepped down from his company. Official reason? Strategic restructuring. Unofficial reason? Investors don't like unpredictability. I felt no satisfaction reading it, just distance. I closed the article and went back to work. On the last day of my Vancouver stay, the writer's room wrapped early. As we packed up, one of the junior writers lingered. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. How did you stay so calm through all of this? The hearing, the press, your divorce? I don't think I could have. I considered the question. I wasn't calm, I said. I was clear. She frowned slightly. About what? About what was mine to carry and what wasn't. She nodded slowly, absorbing it. That night, I flew back to New York. As the plane descended, city lights spread out below me like a map of choices. I realized something then. The revenge everyone expected, the public humiliation, the spectacle. That wasn't what mattered. What mattered was this. I didn't beg to be seen. I didn't scream to be heard. I let the truth stand on its own. And when it did, everyone else had to decide whether to face it or turn away. The next chapter wouldn't be about fighting anymore. It would be about living without apology. And for the first time, that didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like home. By the time spring settled into New York, the noise had thinned out, not disappeared, just lost its urgency. The articles stopped calling. The emails slowed. People who had once needed a quote found someone else. Attention moved on, the way it always does. That was fine with me. I hadn't done any of this to be watched. I moved into a smaller apartment on the west side. One bedroom, tall windows, quiet mornings. I chose it because it faced nothing important. No landmarks, no symbols, just light. The first night there, I slept without dreaming. That felt like progress. My parents didn't visit. They didn't ask for the address. Susan sent short texts every few weeks, neutral updates. Your father's knee surgery went well. Andrew got a promotion. No questions. No invitations. Distance, I learned, can be a kind of truce. Work filled the space where anxiety used to live. The show moved into post-production. Marketing plans came across my desk. Trailers, press strategies, interview prep. Nathan included me in everything. Not ceremonially, practically. One afternoon, he asked if I'd be willing to speak at a university program on authorship and adaptation. You don't have to, he said, but you'd be good at it. I thought about the younger version of myself. the one who'd been told to consider teaching as a fallback, as a consolation. I agreed. The talk was held in a clean auditorium with too much glass. Students filled the seats, notebooks open, phones half hidden. They asked smart questions, hard ones. A young woman in the second row raised her hand. How do you protect your work when people close to you don't respect it? The room went still. I answered honestly. You stop trying to convince them. You put systems in place instead. She nodded slowly, like she'd just been handed something useful. Afterward, I walked back to my hotel alone, the city loud around me, and felt something unfamiliar. Pride. Not the brittle kind, the quiet kind that doesn't need an audience. Marcus didn't reach out again. I heard about him once, indirectly. A mutual acquaintance mentioned he'd relocated. West Coast, new venture, smaller scale. I didn't ask questions. Some stories don't belong to you anymore once you stop being in them. Andrew surprised me by showing up one evening. He texted from downstairs. I'm here, if that's okay. I hesitated, then buzzed him in. He looked older, not in years, in awareness. We sat at the small table in my kitchen. I poured tea. He didn't touch it. I owe you an apology, he said finally. I waited. I watched you get minimized for years, he continued, and I told myself it wasn't my place, or that you didn't mind, or that you were fine. I said nothing. He swallowed. I liked that I didn't have to challenge anyone if you didn't. That was the closest he'd ever come to honesty. Thank you for saying that, I replied. He nodded. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it out loud. I appreciated that he didn't ask for anything else. We talked for another hour. About neutral things, work, books, his life now that the old dynamics had cracked. When he left, I didn't feel drained. That was new. A week later, Susan sent another message. I'm trying to understand where I went wrong. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed. You didn't go wrong in one moment. You went quiet in many. She replied almost immediately. I thought staying quiet kept the peace. It kept the appearance of peace. There was no answer after that. And for once, I didn't feel compelled to fill the silence. The first episode aired in late May. I watched it alone, sitting on the floor with my back against the couch, laptop balanced on my knees. My name appeared in the credits. Not first, not last. Exactly where it belonged. My phone buzzed throughout. Messages from colleagues, writers, readers who recognized lines they loved. People who spoke to me as if I were whole. I turned the phone face down before the episode ended. When the screen went black, I didn't cry. I just sat there, breathing, letting the moment exist without commentary. The next morning, my agent called. We've got interest, she said. New book, strong preempt. I smiled. Let's talk terms. Later that week, I returned the leather notebook to a donation bin near my apartment. I didn't need the reminder anymore. What I needed now was consistency. Boundaries that didn't waver just because someone sounded sincere or familiar. On a quiet Sunday, I walked through a bookstore and found my first novel on a shelf. It had always been there. I just never let myself see it without flinching. I picked it up, ran my fingers over the spine, put it back. That version of me had done her job. I didn't owe her shame anymore. That evening, I wrote something new. Not for publication, not for strategy, just a page. I wrote about the difference between being chosen and choosing yourself. About how love that requires silence isn't love, it's management. I closed the laptop, feeling lighter than I had in years. The last message of the season came from Susan. I'm proud of you. I just didn't know how to say it before. I read it once. Then again, I didn't respond right away. I wasn't angry. I wasn't softened. I was careful. Pride spoken too late doesn't undo damage. But it can mark the start of something else, if it's followed by change. Whether that change came or not was no longer my responsibility. I put the phone down. Outside, the city hummed. People moving, lives intersecting and diverging without ceremony. I stood by the window and realized something simple and important. I was no longer waiting for anyone to understand me. That alone felt like freedom. And there was only one chapter left. Not about conflict. About what happens after you stop confusing survival with success. When you finally build a life that doesn't require you to disappear. That story was just beginning. The quiet that followed didn't feel empty. It felt earned. By early summer, My life had settled into a rhythm that didn't require explanation. Mornings were for writing. Not deadlines, not pitches, just pages. Afternoons belonged to meetings when they mattered, and silence when they didn't. Evenings were simple. Cooking, reading, walking until the city softened around the edges. No one monitored my time anymore. No one corrected my ambition. That alone changed everything. The show was renewed before the finale aired. Nathan called me while I was at the farmer's market, holding tomatoes that smelled like actual soil. 2 seasons, he said. Guaranteed. Same terms. Expanded role if you want it. I smiled to myself. I want it. When I hung up, I realized something that would have terrified me a year earlier. Nothing in my life now depended on being agreeable. Not my income, not my safety, not my sense of worth. The divorce paperwork arrived a week later. Final copies. Stamped. Filed. I signed where I needed to and slid the envelope into a drawer I rarely opened. Not because it hurt to see it, but because it no longer demanded my attention. Marcus Reed was officially no longer my husband. Strangely, the name felt distant, like a character I'd written once and outgrown. I heard about him again through Andrew. He called one afternoon, voice cautious. "He's not doing great," Andrew said. I waited. "He keeps telling people he was blindsided, that he never saw it coming." I looked out the window at the street below. People rarely see consequences coming when they've mistaken silence for consent. Andrew exhaled. "I know." That was all he said. We didn't talk about Marcus again. My parents tried, quietly, to re-enter my life. Susan sent an invitation to dinner. "Just the 3 of us," she said. "No pressure." I didn't accept. I didn't decline either. I let the invitation sit. Distance had taught me something important. Reconnection isn't proven by words. It's proven by patience. If they were serious, they would wait. And if they weren't, I no longer needed to fill the gap. In July, I flew to Los Angeles for a press event tied to the show's release. It was small, controlled, the kind of room where conversations mattered more than appearances. A reporter asked me a question I hadn't prepared for. "Do you think personal conflict makes better art?" I considered it. "I think clarity does," I said. "Conflict just forces you to find it faster." She nodded, writing. Later that night, alone in the hotel room, I thought about how close I'd come to losing my voice by trying to keep other people comfortable. How easily it had happened. Not through cruelty, through dismissal, through jokes, through decisions made without me in rooms I wasn't invited into. That kind of harm doesn't announce itself. It just assumes you'll adapt. I didn't. That was the difference. The new book sold before I finished the 3rd draft. The offer came with language I'd never seen before. Creative control, consultation rights, clear boundaries. Laura laughed when she told me. "They're not taking chances with you anymore," she said. "They know you read contracts." I smiled. Good. One afternoon in August, I ran into my mother by accident, a bookstore near her neighborhood. The kind she liked because it felt respectable. She froze when she saw me. "Evelyn." "Hi, Mom." She looked at me carefully, as if searching for signs. Anger, coldness, something she could respond to. "You look well," she said. "I am." We stood there, shelves between us, other people browsing like nothing fragile was happening. "I've been trying to do better," she said finally. I nodded. "I hope you are." She hesitated. "I didn't know how to stand up to him. To Marcus. To your father. I thought keeping things smooth was kindness." I met her eyes. "It's only kindness if it doesn't cost someone else their voice." She swallowed. "I don't expect anything from you," she said. "I just wanted you to know I see it now." I believed that she believed it. That didn't mean I changed anything. "Thank you for telling me," I said. She reached out, then stopped herself. I walked away without urgency. That was progress. On the anniversary of the hearing, I went back to the courthouse. Not inside, just the steps. I sat there for a few minutes, watching people move in and out, some anxious, some confident, some resigned. I thought about how terrifying it had felt to choose truth over harmony, and how calm it felt now. Revenge, I realized, wasn't what I'd done. Revenge implies obsession. What I chose was alignment. I aligned my life with my values and let everything else fall where it may. The fallout was never my responsibility. That night, I wrote the last line of my new novel. I didn't rush it. I didn't second guess it. I typed the sentence, read it once, and closed the laptop. Done. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, let me say this clearly. Being underestimated doesn't mean you lack value. It means you're surrounded by people who benefit from not seeing it. You don't need to announce your exit. You don't need to win every argument. You just need to stop shrinking. The moment you do, the system that relied on your silence will start to crack on its own. And when it does, you don't have to celebrate. You just have to keep going. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like and subscribe. Not because you owe me anything, but because stories like this remind people they're not alone. Leave a comment if you've ever been dismissed by someone who later realized too late what you were worth. I read them. And if you're still here, thank you. That tells me you understand something important. Choosing yourself isn't dramatic, it's deliberate. And sometimes it's the most powerful ending there is.